When Giants Demand Payment Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the observation deck of the UES Horizon, watching the stars through the reinforced viewport. She had grown up among those stars, not by choice but by necessity. When she was 7 years old, her family had fled Earth Colony Delta 7 when corporate raiders destroyed their settlement. They spent 3 years living on supply ships and trading stations before finding a new home. That experience taught Elena something important about the universe. Running away sometimes meant survival, but it also meant losing everything that mattered. Now at 35, she commanded one of humanity's most advanced deep space vessels. The Horizon was not a warship, though it carried defensive weapons. It was an exploration vessel, designed to map new trade routes and establish peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Elena preferred it that way. She had seen enough conflict in her childhood to last several lifetimes. The ship's communication officer, Lieutenant Kim Rodriguez, approached with a worried expression. Kim was young, barely 23, but she had excellent instincts about alien technology. Her fingers moved nervously over her tablet as she spoke. "Commander, we are receiving some very strange readings from the outer sensor array. Multiple large objects just appeared at the edge of our detection range. They were not there an hour ago." Elena turned from the viewport. Space did not work that way. Objects that large did not simply appear unless they had technology far beyond anything humans possessed. She followed Kim to the bridge, where the rest of her crew was already gathering around the main display screen. Captain Torres, Elena's second-in-command, was a steady man in his 40s who rarely showed concern. Today his face was pale as he pointed at the tactical display. Red dots filled the screen, each one representing a ship larger than anything in Earth's fleet. 47 vessels, Commander. The smallest one is 3 times the size of our largest battleship. They appeared simultaneously in perfect formation. Their technology signature is unlike anything in our databases. Elena studied the display. The formation was precise, mathematical, designed to project power rather than facilitate exploration. These were not traders or explorers. They were conquerors. Dr. James Liu, the ship's xenobiologist and first contact specialist, was running calculations on his workstation. James was brilliant, but sometimes forgot that other people could not follow his rapid thought processes. He looked up with excitement mixed with fear. "Commander, based on their positioning and energy signatures, I estimate their combined firepower could destroy every human ship in space simultaneously. But they are not attacking. They are waiting. This suggests they want something other than our immediate destruction." The communication array suddenly activated without any input from the crew. Lieutenant Rodriguez checked her controls twice before announcing that someone was overriding their systems from outside. The main screen flickered and displayed an image that made everyone on the bridge step backward. The creature speaking to them was enormous, even accounting for the magnification of the communication system. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, with dark green scales covering its body and forearms ending in clawed hands. Its head was proportionally large, with intelligent yellow eyes and a mouth filled with sharp teeth. Despite its fearsome appearance, it wore elaborate robes and jewelry that suggested high status in whatever civilization it represented. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English, though the voice carried harmonics that suggested the language was being translated in real time. "I am High Chancellor Morex of the Galactic Dominion. I speak for 600 worlds and 300 conquered species. You are the humans of the planet called Earth. We have been watching your expansion into space for several decades." Elena stepped forward, though she remained several meters from the screen. She had learned from her parents that showing fear invited exploitation, but showing disrespect invited violence. She kept her voice steady and professional. "I am Commander Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Space Service. We are honored by your contact, High Chancellor. How may we assist you?" Morex made a sound that might have been laughter, though it sounded more like grinding metal. The alien's yellow eyes seemed to look directly through the screen at Elena, as if measuring her worth. "You may assist us by understanding your situation. Your species has expanded to 43 star systems in the past century. You have established trade routes, mining operations, and colonies without permission from the rightful rulers of this galaxy. This expansion ends now. Captain Torres moved to stand beside Elena. His military training made him uncomfortable with threats, but he kept his hands away from any weapons. The bridge crew watched in silence as the High Chancellor continued speaking. The Galactic Dominion has ruled this sector for over 2,000 years. We have brought order to chaos, prosperity to primitive worlds, and peace through strength. Every species that joins our dominion benefits from our protection and wisdom. Those who refuse our generous offer face the consequences of their short-sightedness. Dr. Liu was taking notes frantically, trying to record every detail of this first contact with a galactic civilization. Elena appreciated his thoroughness, but she suspected they would need military analysis more than scientific observations. "What exactly are you offering, High Chancellor?" Elena asked. "We offer membership in the Dominion. Your species will contribute 80% of your resources, technology, and population to the common good of our empire. In return, you will receive protection from hostile forces, access to Dominion markets, and the privilege of serving a cause greater than your individual world." The bridge fell silent. Elena had negotiated with pirates, corporate raiders, and desperate colonists, but she had never encountered demands quite like these. 80% of everything humanity had built, learned, and created. The number was so large it seemed almost meaningless. Captain Torres cleared his throat carefully. "High Chancellor, that seems like a substantial contribution. What would happen if we chose not to join your dominion?" Morex's expression did not change, but something in his posture suggested amusement. "That question reveals your fundamental misunderstanding of your situation. You do not have a choice. Every species asks the same question, and every species receives the same answer. Join willingly and prosper under our guidance, or be forced to join after we demonstrate the futility of resistance." The main screen shifted to show images that made Elena's stomach clench. Planets reduced to glowing slag, cities turned to ash, millions of beings kneeling in submission before Dominion forces. The images continued for several minutes, showing the fate of species that had chosen resistance over cooperation. "We have conquered 512 species using these methods," Morex continued. "Some joined us immediately and avoided unnecessary suffering. Others chose the path of defiance and learned too late that cooperation would have been preferable. The choice, such as it is, remains yours." Elena felt the weight of her childhood memories pressing against her consciousness. She remembered running through burning streets while her parents carried everything they owned in backpacks. She remembered the taste of recycled air on supply ships and the sound of her mother crying when she thought her children were asleep. She also remembered the moment her family stopped running and started building a new life. They had learned that sometimes the only way to stop being a victim was to refuse to accept victimization. "How long do we have to consider your offer?" Elena asked. 4 standard galactic days. At the end of that time, you will provide your answer. There are only 2 acceptable responses: complete submission or complete destruction. Choose wisely. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in absolute silence. Elena looked around at her crew, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were explorers and scientists, not conquerors or politicians. None of them had signed up to make decisions that would determine the fate of their entire species. Lieutenant Rodriguez broke the silence. "Commander, I am receiving priority communications from Earth Command. They are requesting immediate reports on our situation." Elena nodded. Earth's leadership would need to know about this ultimatum immediately. The decision facing humanity was too large for any single person or ship to make. "Transmit all sensor, data, and communication logs to Earth Command with Priority 1 classification. Include a recommendation that they convene the full Leadership Council immediately. Also, begin continuous monitoring of the Dominion fleet. I want to know if they move, breathe, or change their mind about anything." Captain Torres approached Elena as the crew began implementing her orders. "Commander, what do you think they will decide?" Elena looked back at the viewport, where the stars seemed smaller and more distant than they had an hour ago. Somewhere out there, beyond the range of their sensors, 47 alien warships waited for humanity's answer to an impossible choice. I think they will do what humans always do when backed into a corner, Captain. They will look for a third option that nobody else considered. As the Horizon transmitted its reports to Earth, Elena began composing her own message to the Leadership Council. She had learned something important during her childhood as a refugee. Sometimes the difference between survival and destruction was not about strength or resources. Sometimes it was about refusing to accept that you only had two choices when you knew there had to be a third. The Dominion had given humanity 4 days to choose between submission and annihilation. Elena suspected that would be exactly enough. Time for her species to prove that some choices were false choices, and that the most dangerous thing in the universe was a human who refused to accept impossible odds. High Chancellor Morex had conquered 512 species, using fear and superior firepower. Elena wondered if he had ever tried to conquer a species that specialized in doing the impossible when everyone else insisted it could not be done. In 4 days, the galaxy would find out. One word that shook the galaxy. The emergency session of Earth's Global Leadership Council had been running for 72 hours straight. Prime Minister Sarah Chen looked around the circular chamber at the faces of world leaders who had been debating humanity's response to the Dominion ultimatum. Some faces showed exhaustion, others determination, and a few showed barely controlled panic. President Williams of the North American Federation had been arguing for negotiation. We could offer them 40% instead of 80%. That leaves us with enough resources to rebuild while avoiding complete destruction. Chancellor Petrov of the European Alliance shook his head vigorously. You cannot negotiate with beings who consider negotiation a sign of weakness. They have made their terms clear. Prime Minister Chen studied the reports from Commander Vasquez one more time. The Dominion fleet had not moved from their position, but long-range sensors showed additional ships arriving every few hours. Whatever decision Earth made, it would have to be made soon. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, Earth's chief xenopsychologist, had been analyzing the High Chancellor's behavior patterns from the recorded transmission. She stood to address the Council with observations that might prove crucial. Leaders, I have been studying every detail of High Chancellor Morex's communication. This being has conducted this exact conversation over 500 times. His speech patterns, timing, and even his physical positioning suggest this is a practiced performance. He expects specific responses and has prepared for all of them. What kind of responses? Asked President Kim of the Asian Coalition. Fear, anger, desperate bargaining, or immediate submission. His entire approach is designed to trigger one of these 4 reactions. Species that respond with fear often submit immediately. Those that respond with anger usually choose to fight and lose quickly. Desperate bargaining leads to temporary concessions followed by gradual enslavement. Immediate submission skips the violence, but leads to the same outcome. Prime Minister Chen leaned forward in her chair. Dr. Santos, what happens if we respond in a way he has not prepared for? Unknown. But based on his behavioral patterns, I believe an unexpected response might destabilize his psychological advantage. The Dominion's entire system appears to be built on predictable reactions from conquered species. Meanwhile, aboard the UES Horizon, Commander Elena Vasquez was conducting her own analysis. She had spent the last 3 days studying everything humanity knew about galactic civilizations, military tactics, and diplomatic protocols. More importantly, she had been thinking about her own experiences as a refugee and what she had learned about survival. Dr. Liu approached Elena with a discovery that could change everything. His excitement was barely contained as he shared his findings. Commander, I have been monitoring subspace communications from the Dominion fleet. They are not just talking to Earth. They are sending regular reports to hundreds of worlds throughout their empire. But here's the interesting part. I have detected unauthorized transmissions piggybanking on their official communications. Elena looked up from her own research. What kind of unauthorized transmissions? Coded messages between enslaved populations on different worlds. They are using the Dominion's own communication network to coordinate activities. The coding is sophisticated, but our computers managed to decrypt portions of it. Commander, there are active resistance movements on dozens of Dominion worlds. This information changed Elena's understanding of the situation entirely. The Dominion was not as stable as High Chancellor Morex wanted Earth to believe. If resistance movements already existed, then humanity's response could have implications far beyond Earth's survival. Captain Torres joined the conversation with additional intelligence. Commander, our deep space sensors have detected something else. The Dominion fleet is not just here to conquer Earth. They are also here to prevent something. We have identified at least 12 ships positioned specifically to jam subspace communications between Earth and the outer colonies. Elena studied the tactical display. The Dominion was afraid of something. They were not simply collecting tribute from another conquered species. They were trying to contain information or prevent Earth from communicating with someone else. Dr. Liu, can you establish contact with these resistance movements? Possibly, but it would require using the Dominion's own communication network. If they detect the transmission, they would know we are aware of the resistance. Elena made a decision that would have consequences throughout the galaxy. Do it, but do it in a way that maximizes the impact. I want every enslaved being in Dominion space to hear humanity's response to their ultimatum. Back on Earth, the Global Leadership Council had reached a consensus after 3 days of continuous debate. Prime Minister Chen stood to address the chamber for the final time before humanity's response was transmitted. We have considered every option available to us. We have analyzed the military implications, the economic consequences, and the moral dimensions of our decision. We have consulted with experts in xenopsychology, military strategy, and diplomatic protocol. The decision we make today will define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. She paused to look around the chamber at the faces of leaders who represented 7 billion human beings. High Chancellor Morex expects us to respond with fear, anger, bargaining, or submission. He is prepared for all of these responses because he has seen them 512 times before. Today, humanity will give him a response he has never heard. The transmission to the UES horizon was brief but decisive. Elena read the message 3 times before calling her senior staff to the bridge. When they were assembled, she explained Earth's decision and her own plan to amplify its impact. Earth Command has authorized me to respond to the Dominion ultimatum. However, we are not simply responding for Earth. We are responding for every species that has ever been given this same false choice. Dr. Liu had successfully established contact with resistance networks on 43 Dominion worlds. The communication channels were open, meaning that humanity's response would be heard simultaneously by enslaved beings across hundreds of star systems. High Chancellor Morex appeared on the main screen exactly 96 hours after his initial ultimatum. His expression showed the same arrogant confidence Elena had seen 4 days earlier. He clearly expected this conversation to follow the same pattern as his previous 512 conquests. Commander Vasquez, your time has expired. What is humanity's response to the Dominion's generous offer of membership? Elena stood before the communication screen with her crew behind her. She knew that her next words would be heard not just by the High Chancellor, but by resistance fighters, enslaved populations, and free beings throughout Dominion space. She thought about her childhood as a refugee, about the moment her family stopped running and started building a new life, and about the choice between accepting victimization and refusing to be a victim. High Chancellor Morex, humanity's response to your ultimatum is simple and final. She paused, knowing that this moment would be remembered for centuries. Never. The silence that followed lasted for nearly 30 seconds. High Chancellor Morex's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something that might have been fear. His yellow eyes widened as he processed a response he had never heard before. Never? He repeated, as if the word was unfamiliar to him. Never, Elena confirmed. We will never submit to slavery. We will never surrender our freedom. We will never accept that our only choices are submission or destruction. We choose a third option, resistance. The psychological impact on High Chancellor Morex was immediate and visible. For the first time in over 2,000 years of conquest, he had encountered a species that refused to accept the terms of engagement he had always controlled. But the real impact was happening throughout Dominion space, where enslaved beings heard a word they had forgotten they could say. On mining worlds, factory planets, and agricultural colonies, workers stopped what they were doing and repeated the word that was spreading through their communication networks. Never. On the aquatic world of Kepler 438b, a being called Kethra had spent 15 years organizing resistance activities in secret. Kethra's species had been conquered 3 generations ago, and most of his people had accepted their situation as permanent. When he heard humanity's response, he realized that acceptance was a choice, not an inevitability. Kethra activated every communication channel his resistance network had developed over the years and transmitted a single word to every enslaved being on his world. Never. Within hours, the word was spreading faster than the Dominion could contain it. Production stopped on 12 worlds as workers repeated the human response to their own oppressors. Security forces found themselves facing crowds of beings who had learned to say never instead of yes, master. High Chancellor. Morex ended the communication with Earth abruptly, but the damage was already done. Elena's response had not just rejected the Dominion's ultimatum. It had reminded every enslaved being in the galaxy that they had always possessed the power to refuse. Commander Vasquez received reports throughout the day of uprisings on Dominion worlds. Each report used the same word that was becoming a symbol of resistance across hundreds of star systems. Never. Captain Torres approached Elena with a tactical analysis that confirmed what she had suspected. Commander, the Dominion fleet is receiving emergency transmissions from throughout their empire. Their ships are being recalled to deal with widespread civil unrest. Elena nodded, understanding that humanity had won something more valuable than a military victory. They had won the war for the minds of every enslaved being in Dominion space. Dr. Liu approached with readings from their long-range sensors. Commander, the Dominion fleet is preparing to withdraw from Earth orbit. However, they are also deploying communication jammers to prevent us from maintaining contact with the resistance. Movements. Elena smiled for the first time in 4 days. The Dominion was retreating, but they were also afraid. High Chancellor Morex had realized that humanity's defiance was more dangerous to his empire than any weapon. Dr. Liu, can we establish a permanent communication network with the resistance movements before the jammers become fully operational? Yes, Commander, but it would require transmitting our entire database of subspace communication protocols. We would be giving the resistance movements the same communication technology that Earth uses. Elena did not hesitate. Do it. Freedom is not something you keep to yourself. Either everyone is free or no one truly is. As the Dominion fleet began its withdrawal from Earth space, Elena knew that the real war was just beginning. Humanity had said never to tyranny, and that word was now echoing throughout the galaxy. The Dominion would have to choose between losing their empire gradually to resistance movements or trying to destroy every world that had learned to say never. Elena suspected they would choose destruction, which meant humanity would soon face the true test of their defiance. But for the first time since this crisis began, she was confident in her species' chances. Humans had always been at their best when fighting impossible odds, and they had just gained allies they never expected to have. The word never had become more than humanity's response to an ultimatum. It had become the battle cry of every being in the galaxy who refused to accept that freedom was something only others could possess. When slaves remember, they can choose. 3 weeks after humanity's defiant response echoed across the galaxy, the Dominion Empire was collapsing faster than High Chancellor Morex could contain it. On 57 worlds, enslaved populations had stopped working, stopped obeying, and started saying the word that was destroying his carefully constructed order. Never. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, now serving as the flagship of an unlikely fleet. Human ships flew alongside vessels operated by former Dominion slaves who had seized control of their own worlds. The rebellion that started with one word had grown into a coalition of free beings fighting for the right to remain free. Kethra's aquatic form filled the communication screen as he reported from the liberated world of Kepler 438b. His species had adapted their underwater cities into command centers for coordinating resistance activities across multiple star systems. Commander Vasquez, the Dominion has withdrawn their garrison forces from 12 more agricultural worlds. The workers have declared independence and are requesting membership in what they are calling the Never Alliance. Elena smiled at the name. The resistance movements had chosen for their coalition. The Never Alliance was not a government or empire. It was simply an agreement between free worlds to help each other stay free. Membership required only one commitment: never again accepting slavery and never imposing it on others. Dr. Liu approached, with intelligence reports that painted a picture of an empire in terminal decline. Commander, our long-range sensors indicate that the Dominion has lost effective control of over 40% of their territory. Production has dropped by 60%, and their military is being stretched thin trying to maintain order. Captain Torres added his own analysis from the tactical station. Commander, we are also receiving reports that some Dominion military units are defecting to the resistance. It appears that many of their soldiers are from conquered species who were forced into military service. This news was particularly significant because it meant the Dominion could no longer rely on their own armed forces. When soldiers start refusing orders and joining the people they were ordered to suppress, any government faces an existential crisis. Elena activated the fleet-wide communication system to address the growing alliance of free worlds. Ships from dozens of different species had gathered in the neutral space between Earth and the Dominion's core territories. It was the largest gathering of independent vessels in galactic history. Captains and commanders of the Never Alliance, we have reached a critical moment in our struggle for freedom. The Dominion is preparing what they call a final solution to our rebellion. Intelligence reports indicate they are consolidating their remaining forces for a massive assault designed to crush our movement completely. She paused to let this information be processed by beings from cultures across the galaxy. They believe that destroying our fleet and our leadership will cause the resistance movements to collapse out of fear. They are about to learn that freedom cannot be destroyed by destroying the people who first spoke its name. General Stone, Earth's military strategist, had been analyzing Dominion battle tactics for weeks. His assessment was sobering but not discouraging. The Dominion's remaining fleet still outnumbers us 3-1, and their individual ships are more heavily armed than anything we possess. In a traditional battle, we would lose decisively. However, this will not be a traditional battle. Elena nodded. Humans had never won wars by fighting traditionally, and their alien allies had learned this lesson quickly. The Never Alliance fought using principles the Dominion had never encountered: voluntary cooperation instead of forced obedience, shared intelligence instead of compartmentalized information, and creative tactics instead of rigid doctrine. Meanwhile, on the Dominion flagship Eternal Dominance, High Chancellor Morex was discovering that ruling through fear becomes impossible when people stop being afraid. His council of advisors brought reports of continued defections, production failures, and military defeats. High Chancellor, reported Admiral Vex Prime, a scarred veteran of hundreds of conquest campaigns, our psychological warfare specialists cannot explain why the resistance continues to grow despite our demonstrations of superior firepower. Every time we destroy a rebel world, 2 more worlds declare independence. Morex's yellow eyes glowed with frustrated rage. These humans have contaminated our empire with dangerous ideas. Their concept of voluntary cooperation is spreading like a plague through our most reliable populations. "What are your orders, High Chancellor?" asked Admiral Vex Prime. "We will end this rebellion by eliminating its source. Prepare every ship we have for an assault on Earth. When the humans are destroyed, their alien followers will remember why they chose obedience in the first place." But Morex had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the rebellion he was facing. The Never Alliance was not following humanity. It was cooperating with humanity in pursuit of shared goals. Destroying Earth would not end the rebellion. It would prove to every free being in the galaxy that the Dominion could only maintain control through genocide. Elena received word of the Dominion's battle plans through Zara 9. a silicon-based lifeform who served as a communication officer on the Dominion flagship. Zara 9 had been secretly transmitting intelligence to the Resistance for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to defect openly. The message was brief, but crucial. Final assault begins in 48 hours. All available Dominion forces converging on Earth. Morex believes destroying humanity will end rebellion. Recommend evacuation of Earth or preparation for siege. Elena called an emergency council of Never Alliance leaders. The holographic conference included beings from across the galaxy, each representing worlds that had chosen freedom over security. Friends, the Dominion is committing everything they have to one final battle. They believe that destroying Earth will break our alliance and restore their empire. We have 2 choices: evacuate Earth and preserve our fleet, or defend Earth and risk everything on a single engagement. Kethra spoke first from his underwater command center. Commander Vasquez, evacuation would be the strategically sound choice, but it would also prove to every enslaved being in the galaxy that resistance ultimately means running away. A crystalline being called Shard Leader contributed from the mining world of Vega 7. If we run now, the Dominion will spend the next 1,000 years telling conquered species that even the humans eventually ran away when faced with overwhelming force. Elena realized that the tactical decision was actually a philosophical one. The Never Alliance could survive as a military force by avoiding this battle, but it could only succeed as a symbol of freedom by facing it. Then we make our stand at Earth, not because it is humanity's world, but because it is where the idea of saying never first took root. The Battle of Earth began at dawn on July 15, 2387. The Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark ships blotting out the stars around humanity's homeworld. High Chancellor Morex had brought over 200 capital ships and thousands of smaller vessels. Elena's fleet looked insignificant by comparison. 47 ships of various sizes and designs, representing species that had never fought together before this rebellion began. But appearances were deceiving. As the Dominion fleet moved into attack formation, something unprecedented happened. Zara 9's voice echoed across all communication frequencies, reaching every ship in both fleets. Attention all Dominion forces. I am Communication Officer Zara 9 of the flagship Eternal Dominance. I hereby refuse all orders to attack the Never Alliance. I choose freedom. The Silicon-based officer's defection was the signal for a coordinated uprising that Elena and her allies had been planning for weeks. On 37 Dominion ships, enslaved crew members seized control of their vessels and turned their weapons against their former masters. Admiral Vex Prime found himself commanding a fleet that was literally tearing itself apart, as soldiers chose sides in the middle of battle. High Chancellor Morex watched in horror as his perfect formation dissolved into chaos. "This is impossible," Morex screamed at his remaining officers. "Military discipline cannot simply collapse." But it could collapse, and it did. The Dominion's entire system was built on the assumption that conquered beings would always choose obedience over resistance. When that assumption proved false, the system had no mechanisms for adaptation. Elena led her portion of the Never Alliance fleet in coordinated strikes against Dominion command ships. But the real battle was being fought inside the Dominion fleet itself, as crews chose between following orders and following their consciences. The engagement lasted for 6 hours, but the outcome was determined in the first 30 minutes, when over half of the Dominion fleet switched sides. Ships that had arrived to crush the rebellion found themselves joining it instead. High Chancellor Morex made a final desperate attempt to salvage his empire by targeting Earth directly. His flagship, accompanied by the few vessels still under his control, broke away from the main battle and aimed for humanity's homeworld. Elena intercepted his ship in Earth's outer atmosphere. The 2 vessels faced each other above the blue planet where the word never had first been spoken as a rejection of galactic tyranny. "High Chancellor Morex," Elena transmitted on an open channel, "your empire is finished. Your own soldiers have chosen freedom over fear. Surrender now, and you can help us build something better." Morex's response revealed the fundamental difference between rulers and leaders. "You understand nothing, human. Without the Dominion, the galaxy will collapse into chaos. Order requires hierarchy. Peace requires submission. No, Elena replied simply. Order requires justice. Peace requires choice. The final confrontation between the UES Horizon and the Eternal Dominance was brief, but symbolically crucial. Morex's ship was more powerful, but Elena's ship was crewed by beings who had chosen to be there. When soldiers fight for something they believe in, they find strength that drafted armies never possess. The Eternal Dominance was disabled rather than destroyed. Elena had learned from humanity's history that martyrdom could be more dangerous than defeat. Morex would live to see the galaxy he had ruled transformed into something he could never have imagined. In the months that followed the Battle of Earth, the Never Alliance evolved into the Galactic Federation of Free Worlds. Unlike the Dominion, membership was voluntary and could be revoked at any time. Unlike traditional alliances, there were no dominant species or subordinate members. Elena found herself serving as the Federation's first coordinator, a position she accepted reluctantly and only temporarily. Her first official act was to establish the principle that no being could hold galactic leadership for more than 2 years, and that all major decisions required consensus rather than majority rule. The transformation of Dominion space took place faster than anyone had expected. Worlds that had been enslaved for centuries began experimenting with self-governance, trade cooperation, and cultural exchange. The communication networks that had once carried orders from Dominion overseers now carried ideas, art, and scientific discoveries between free civilizations. Dr. Liu established the Galactic Institute for Cooperative Science, where researchers from hundreds of species worked together on projects that benefited everyone. The Institute's first major success was developing faster-than-light communication technology that allowed real-time conversations between distant worlds. Kethra became the Federation's first ambassador for former slave worlds, helping newly liberated populations adapt to freedom while avoiding the chaos that often followed the collapse of authoritarian systems. His underwater cities became models for sustainable development that other worlds adapted to their own environments. Even High Chancellor Morex found a role in the new galaxy. After serving 2 years in detention, he was offered the opportunity to teach courses on the dangers of authoritarian government. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he accepted. His lectures on How Empires Fall, A Personal Perspective, became some of the most popular educational broadcasts in Federation space. The former Dominion Admiral Vex Prime chose a different path. He established the Federation Defense Coordination Council, which helped free worlds develop military capabilities sufficient to protect themselves without threatening their neighbors. His motto became, strong enough to defend, wise enough not to attack. Zara 9 used her expertise in communication systems to create the Galactic Freedom Network, a broadcasting system that ensured no world could ever again be isolated from the rest of the galaxy. The network carried news, entertainment, educational programs, and most importantly, reminders that freedom was a choice every being could make. 5 years after the Battle of Earth, Elena stood once again at the observation deck of the UES Horizon, now serving as a diplomatic vessel for the Federation. Through the viewport, she could see ships from dozens of species working together to construct a space station that would serve as the Federation's rotating capital. Captain Torres, now promoted to admiral and commanding his own ship, contacted Elena with a report that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Elena, we have received applications for Federation membership from 12 more worlds this month. 3 of them are former Dominion core worlds that want to transition to democratic governance. Elena smiled at the irony. The planets that had once been the heart of the galaxy's most oppressive empire were now asking to join an alliance based on voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. Dr. Liu approached with his latest research project, a comprehensive study of how the word never had spread through galactic civilization and changed the course of history. Elena, I have been analyzing the linguistic and psychological impact of humanity's response to the Dominion ultimatum. The word never was translated into over 3,000 languages within the first week, but its meaning evolved beyond simple refusal. In many cultures, it has become synonymous with the concept of choosing one's own path. Elena reflected on how much had changed since that morning when she had been drinking coffee and watching Earth turn peacefully below her ship. Humanity had entered the galactic community not as conquerors or subjects, but as partners in building something unprecedented. The Federation was not perfect. There were disputes between member worlds, disagreements about policies, and occasional conflicts that required mediation. But these problems were solved through discussion, compromise, and mutual respect rather than through force and intimidation. More importantly, the Federation had established principles that were spreading beyond its official membership. Even worlds that chose not to join the Federation had adopted concepts like voluntary cooperation, consensual governance, and the right of individuals to say never to unjust authority. Elena received a communication from Earth informing her that the Global Leadership Council had voted to establish the annual Day of Defiance, commemorating the moment when humanity chose to say never to the Dominion. But the holiday was not a celebration of human superiority. It was a reminder that every thinking being possessed the power to refuse tyranny. As Elena prepared to end her term as Federation coordinator, she reflected on the lessons humanity had learned and taught during its first contact with galactic civilization. The most important lesson was also the simplest. Freedom was not something that could be given or taken away by others. It was something that existed whenever someone chose to claim it. The galaxy had changed because one species refused to accept that their only choices were submission or destruction. They had insisted on a third option that seemed impossible until they made it real. They had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to overwhelming force was a single word spoken with absolute conviction: never. Elena's replacement as Federation coordinator was Kethra, whose species' experience with both slavery and liberation made him uniquely qualified to lead the continuing effort to build a galaxy based on cooperation rather than domination. In his inaugural address, he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. The humans taught us that we could say never to tyranny. Now we must teach ourselves to say yes to the hard work of building something better. Freedom is not the absence of responsibility. It is the acceptance of responsibility for our own choices and respect for the choices of others. Elena returned to her original role as an explorer, but now she explored a galaxy transformed by the idea that every being had value and every world had the right to choose its own path. The UES Horizon carried diplomatic missions to new species, scientific expeditions to unknown worlds, and most importantly, the message that there was always a third option when others insisted only two existed. Years later, when galactic historians analyzed the fall of the Dominion Empire and the rise of the Federation, they would identify many contributing factors: technological innovations, military strategies, political movements, and economic pressures. But the historians who understood the true nature of the transformation focused on something much simpler. One species had been given an impossible choice and had refused to accept it. They had spoken a single word that reminded every enslaved being in the galaxy of a truth they had forgotten. Sometimes the difference between slavery and freedom was simply the courage to say never when others demanded submission. The word had become more than humanity's response to an ultimatum. It had become the foundation of a new kind of civilization, one built on the revolutionary idea that thinking beings could choose cooperation over coercion, partnership over domination, and freedom over security. In the end, the galaxy learned that the most dangerous force in the universe was not superior technology or overwhelming firepower. It was the simple recognition that every being possessed the power to choose and that some choices could change everything.